Welcome to Somnus Historia, where the world slows down and history gently whispers you to sleep. My name is Lilian, and tonight I invite you to rest. We're leaving behind the noise of the modern world, its screens, its clocks, its restless pace, and traveling to a place shrouded in dust, wind, and myth. A place once believed to lie at the center of the world. This is Babylon. But not the Babylon of legend alone. Tonight, we will not chase after empires or marvel at towering ziggurats. We'll go deeper, into kitchens, into alleys, into quiet courtyards where sandals brushed baked clay, where people whispered prayers to gods shaped in stone and sealed in tablets of law. You may be surprised by how familiar it all feels. How daily life, even in a city of omens and gods, was filled with small tasks, quiet worries, and sacred routines. So, before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy slow, hidden history told gently like this. And if you're still awake, I'd love to know where and when you're listening from. Leave a comment below. Your presence here means more than you know. Now, you don't need to do anything at all. Let go of the day. Let your thoughts soften. Let your breathing slow. Whether you stay with me through every word or fall asleep somewhere between the grain markets and the temple steps, you are welcome here. So come, walk with me through the forgotten gates of a city once lit by oil lamps and starlight. A city where every shadow held a story and every silence was sacred. Let's begin. Imagine you wake up in a different life, not in a bed with pillows and morning alarms, but on a woven mat laid across the floor of a small clay-walled room. The ceiling above you is flat, wooden, and low, and just beyond it, the early light of the Mesopotamian dawn begins to stretch across the sky. The mat is rough, but familiar. The earth beneath it holds the memory of the night's coolness. It's quiet, not silent, but soft. Outside, a bird sings a thin, reedy note, a goat coughs, and somewhere in the distance, a broom is sweeping dust from a stone step. This is the beginning of a typical day in Babylon, perhaps around 1750 BCE, during the time of King Hammurabi. But today, you're not anyone important. You're not royalty. You're not a god's mouthpiece. You're just you, a working person, a resident of the city, maybe a potter, or a midwife, or a laborer who knows the weight of bricks more than the stroke of a pen. And today is just another day. The humble home. Your home is simple, made of mud brick, sun-dried and sturdy. It has a courtyard in the middle, open to the sky, where a jar of water rests in the shade. The walls are bare, but not empty. A few etched charms,
a carved image of a protective spirit above the doorway. A clay stove sits in one corner, now cold. There's no furniture, not really. No bed frame, no chairs. You sit on mats. You sleep on mats. You eat from bowls you likely shaped yourself or traded for with a neighbor. Yet still, it is home. And in its own way, it is beautiful. The sun is rising, and Babylon is awakening. A city begins to breathe. You step outside and feel the clay beneath your feet, dry, cracked in places, warm in others. The alley is narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass. It smells faintly of last night's cook fires and the river beyond the walls. Across the way, an elderly woman begins to chant softly, perhaps a hymn, perhaps a habit. A child carries a clay pot that seems far too heavy for its size. And someone has already started grinding grain. It's not chaotic, but rhythmic, like the city itself is breathing. Inhale, exhale. Labor, rest. Dawn, dust, and dusk. Breaking the fast. Breakfast, if it can be called that, is not a feast. There is leftover barley bread, tough at the edges, dense in the middle. You tear off a piece and chew it slowly. Perhaps you add a smear of dried date mash if you're fortunate, or drink a small cup of sour beer, not alcoholic by modern standards, but thick and rich like liquid bread. There is water, too, drawn the evening before, stored in a shaded jar to keep it cool. You eat quietly, not because the moment demands silence, but because the city does. It's early, and early hours belong to the calm. Mainstream historical fact. We know from recovered tablets that Babylonians commonly ate 2 meals a day, a light morning meal and a more filling evening one. Meals were practical and based on availability, often revolving around grains, legumes, dates, and dairy. Light joke. The closest thing to a cafe in Babylon was standing beside the oven and eating whatever didn't burn. The work of the day. Your hands are already rough, from clay or rope or stone. Whatever your role, the tasks are familiar. If you're a brickmaker, you join others by the edge of the city where clay is gathered, shaped, and baked beneath the sun. If you're a mid-level scribe, you step into the cool interior of a temple annex, where rows of apprentices copy legal texts, tax records, and letters to distant governors. If you're a woman, you may work within the home, weaving, grinding grain, preparing food, or at the temple, especially if you serve in one of the goddess cults. If you're enslaved, you have no say in what comes next. But most people simply work. The hours pass slowly, and the sun grows stronger. You wipe sweat from your brow using the hem of your linen robe. You hear the distant sound of livestock, of clay wheels creaking, and of your own breath, rhythmic and constant. Midday shadows. By midday, the city slows down. People seek shade, the narrow alleys become still. The Euphrates glimmers in the sun, wide, smooth, and humming with silent power. Someone chants from a rooftop. You take rest wherever you can, inside your home or beneath a woven cloth hung like a curtain across the courtyard. The breeze is slow, and the heat presses against your skin like a second robe. Fringe tidbit. Some Babylonian homes were built with cooling tunnels, narrow vents that allowed airflow beneath the floors, a surprisingly advanced attempt at indoor climate control. Light joke. Unfortunately, none of them could control the flies, and Babylonian flies were very determined employees. A city of laws. As the day moves forward, you remember the rules that shape everything. You cannot simply dig a new canal or build a new oven or marry without witness. Every part of your life is woven into law. Mainstream historical fact. Babylon is famous for the Code of Hammurabi, a set of nearly 300 legal decisions inscribed on a large stone stele. But these laws aren't just carved in stone. They live in conversation, in gossip, in threat and memory. A careless builder might lose his reputation, or worse, his freedom if a wall collapses. A dispute over barley can escalate into a formal case before elders, and a stolen goat can lead to exile. Ongoing debate. Historians still argue whether the Code of Hammurabi was truly enforced in daily life, or if it served more as a political and religious symbol of royal authority. Either way, you remember the rules, because they remember you. Evening and rooftop rest. As the sun softens into orange, Babylon breathes again. Vendors call from corners. Fires are lit in the courtyards. The smell of lentils and onions stewing in clay pots drifts through the alleys. You sit with your family, eating from a shared bowl. No forks, no plates, just bread, broth, and quiet company. And when the meal is done, you climb to the roof. The stars are already out, bright, cold, watching. In Babylon, stars are not decoration. They are signs, divine writings in the sky. You may not read them, but you believe they are read by others. And perhaps that's enough. You lie back. The clay beneath you still warm from the sun. The air is dry, the wind gentle. You close your eyes, and just before sleep, you think, today was ordinary, and in its rhythm, there was peace. Soft transition. Now that we've walked through a day in Babylon, through its alleys, its homes, its dust and dreams, let us turn our eyes to a man who shaped the city's final years and whose absence would echo louder than his rule.
The rise and madness of King Nabonidus. Let us drift back, not to the early morning streets of Babylon, but into its towering halls, into the cold, echoing silence of the palace, a place of judgment, of ritual, of burden. And in the center of this place stands a man. He is not remembered like Hammurabi. He does not live in fables like Nebuchadnezzar, but he was Babylon's last true king. His name was Nabonidus, and his rule, quiet at first, then increasingly strange, would reshape the empire's final years. Some called him wise. Others whispered he had gone mad, and still others said he had forgotten Babylon altogether. A man apart. Nabonidus did not begin life in a golden cradle. He was not born to kingship. He was likely a nobleman, possibly a priest, well-connected, thoughtful, perhaps even introverted. His rise was not through conquest, but through favor.
When he became king around 556 BCE, few predicted that he would be the last. At first, things seemed ordinary. He honored the gods. He gave offerings at temples. He led the army against rebellions in the west. He ordered inscriptions in the old style, referencing kings long dead, writing in the voice of ancient power. But from the beginning, there was something different about Nabonidus. He did not favor Marduk, the high god of Babylon. Instead, he worshipped a lesser deity, Sin, the moon god, whose temples lay far to the north. To some, this was heresy. To others, it was simply odd. But to Nabonidus, it was destiny. He claimed visions. He claimed dreams. He said Sin spoke to him directly and gave him purpose. And then, one day, Nabonidus left. Not just the palace, not just the city, but Babylon itself. He journeyed to the desert, to Tama, an oasis in what is now northern Saudi Arabia. And there, he stayed for 10 years, leaving the empire and the priesthood and the capital behind. Why? No one agrees. Some say he was ill. Others say he feared conspiracies in Babylon. Still others believe he went to build temples to his beloved moon god, to create a new center of worship, far from the old order. Whatever the truth, his absence changed everything. Babylon without its king. In Nabonidus's place, his son, Belshazzar, took up royal duties. You may know the name from a different place. Belshazzar would later appear in biblical tradition, the scene of the writing on the wall, a feast interrupted by divine warning. But in real history, he was the prince left to hold the throne for a ghost king father. Priests in Babylon were furious. They claimed that the rituals of the new year, sacred, vital, deeply rooted in the rhythm of the city, could not be completed without the king present. And so, year after year, they grumbled. They murmured. They waited. While Nabonidus wrote long prayers from his desert home, Babylon began to fracture. The return and the fall. After a decade in exile, Nabonidus finally returned. But Babylon had changed. New powers were rising. To the east, in the mountains of Persia, a young leader named Cyrus had begun to unite the tribes. He conquered swiftly, cleverly, not with brute force, but with diplomacy and calculation. By the time Nabonidus re-entered his capital, the priesthood had turned against him. And the people? They remembered how long he had been gone. In 539 BCE, the Persian army arrived. There was no great battle, no fiery siege. The gates opened, and Cyrus walked in. It is said the people welcomed him, that Babylon fell not with violence, but with a whisper. What happened to Nabonidus? Some sources claim Nabonidus was captured and exiled again, this time by the Persians. Others say he lived out his final years in quiet isolation. He wrote prayers, He gave offerings to the moon. He faded. But the legacy he left behind is complicated. He was a king who saw visions, who ignored the capital, who prayed to a forgotten god while his empire slipped away. Some say he was mad. Others misunderstood. A gentle reflection. As we lie here now, eyes closed, breath slow, we might imagine Nabonidus walking alone beneath the desert stars, looking up at the moon he so adored, whispering ancient prayers into the wind, wishing, perhaps, for another chance. He was not evil. He was not glorious. He was simply human, torn between faith and duty, pulled between power and isolation. A man who tried to shape the world according to a dream and found it unwilling to follow. Now let the desert wind carry us forward. Let the moon fade behind soft clouds. And as you drift deeper into rest, we'll turn our thoughts not to men, but to the mystery beneath the city itself.
As the moon drifts higher over the silent ruins of what once was, we turn inward and downward, not toward the noise of bustling markets or the forgotten drama of courtly lives, but toward the quiet depths, the places buried, hidden, waiting. Beneath Babylon's surface, beneath its dust and crumbling sun-baked bricks, lies another world, a world layered in silence, a city beneath a city. And tonight, we follow that silence. You see, Babylon was not built all at once. It rose slowly, carefully, over centuries. When buildings crumbled, they were not removed. Instead, they were covered, rebuilt, reformed, one layer on top of another. A courtyard became a floor. A temple wall became a foundation. And over time, the old city was entombed by the new. This method of renewal created a vertical history, a timeline not carved into stone, but stacked in dust. When you walk across the open courtyards or pass beneath a reconstructed arch in your mind, know that beneath every footstep may lie hundreds of years of forgotten lives. Beneath every alley, another corridor. Beneath every ziggurat, a darker chamber. And while sunlight reveals the surface, it is shadow that guards what lies below. For centuries, Babylon vanished. Its stories lived on in texts and myths, but the physical city was swallowed by time and sand. The Euphrates shifted its path. Wind buried walls. Generations passed without knowing what lay beneath their feet. It wasn't until the 1800s that excavations began in earnest. The ruins we see today, partial walls, blue-glazed bricks, fragments of temples, are only glimpses. The true city still lies beneath. Among the greatest of those vanished places is the Temple of Marduk, the Asagala. Described in ancient tablets as vast, glittering with gold, central to the life of the city, the Asagala was said to be the heart of Babylonian worship. And yet, when archaeologists dug, it wasn't there. Or rather, not where they expected. They found its name in inscriptions, found prayers dedicated to it, found measurements describing its size, but not the temple itself.
Some believed it had been destroyed, dismantled by invaders, its stones repurposed. Others thought it lay deeper, still untouched beneath rising groundwater and layers of compacted clay. And then came the more poetic suggestion that Babylon had buried its own heart, that in building ever upward, the city had entombed its sacred core. In the early 1900s, a German archaeologist named Robert Coldway spent nearly 20 years carefully mapping the ruins. He uncovered parts of the processional way, pieces of Ishtar's gate, fragments of inscriptions. But when he followed clues pointing to the Asagala's location, he ran into earth too unstable to dig further. Beneath it, he believed, were the remains of the great temple, still lying undisturbed. There is something beautiful in that possibility, that even after centuries of conquest, erosion, and theft, something sacred remains hidden, not by accident, but by the city's own growth, a heart still beating quietly beneath layers of history. And Asagala was only one temple among many. There were shrines to Nabu, god of wisdom and writing, to Gula, goddess of healing, often represented with a dog by her side, to Ishtar, fierce and radiant. Some temples were large and lavish, others small, tucked into corners or courtyards. Some are gone completely. Others, we believe, are still waiting. In the silence of a buried room, perhaps there is still a carved brick that once lined a sacred wall. Perhaps some ashes from a burnt offering remain, pressed gently into the earth. And perhaps, on very quiet nights, the memory of chanting, a low, rhythmic hum, lingers just faintly beneath the wind. To dig through Babylon is to dig through time itself. But time is not always willing to be disturbed. Many of the city's lowest layers are unreachable now. Groundwater has flooded them. Political instability has blocked access. The tools exist, but the patience and protection needed for such a delicate unearthing is rare. And so the city sleeps. A mystery, not lost, but preserved, not forgotten, but waiting. As you rest now, feel the weight of those layers, one atop another, like soft blankets of history wrapped around a place once filled with light, with fire, with faith. You are not walking among ghosts. You are lying beside them. Let the ruins remain undisturbed for now. Let the past keep its secrets a little longer, and let us rise gently from the dust, ready to explore what life was like not beneath, but above, among those who lived far from the ground, behind carved doors, wrapped in fine linen.
The night is deep, and our thoughts have wandered through stone corridors and forgotten sanctuaries. But now, gently, we rise toward the surface. We leave behind the damp stillness of buried temples and ascend into a different world, a quieter, more refined world. A world of cool courtyards, flowing linen, and measured steps. Imagine a high-walled home, its outer surface coated in smooth white plaster that glows softly in the early morning sun. Inside, a private garden flourishes, date palms swaying gently above a tiled pool of still water. Cane chairs sit in shaded corners, arranged for whispered conversations. This is not the realm of dusty markets or weary laborers. This is a sanctuary reserved for the few. The noble families of Babylon lived in carefully maintained seclusion. They were judges, scribes, high-ranking temple officials, and landowners, people whose names mattered, whose decisions shaped the city's rhythm. Wealth alone did not define them. It was lineage, education, proximity to power. They did not rush, they did not shout. They moved through the world with slow certainty. Their clothing was not the rough wool of shepherds or the plain wraps of workers. They wore linen, soft, bleached, and layered in flowing folds. Men often donned embroidered robes tied with leather belts, while women wore draped garments, sometimes with decorative fringes or imported dyes. Adornments were common: necklaces of lapis lazuli, bracelets of gold, earrings of polished carnelian. Their hair was styled with care, their skin anointed with oils scented with cedar and myrrh. They smelt always faintly of something rare. Inside the household, life was structured but calm. The head of the family might review land contracts, issue orders to servants, or meet visiting officials. Women managed the household with quiet authority, overseeing food stores, textiles, and the upbringing of children. They were also caretakers of family piety, offering incense to gods in the home shrine and preparing gifts for the temple. In many noble homes, a small altar stood in a corner, adorned with offerings of fruit, oil, or carved figurines. Worship was quiet, daily, essential. The homes themselves were inward-looking, arranged around shaded courtyards. Outer walls had few windows, preserving privacy and shielding against desert heat. Rooms opened into central spaces filled with light, bird song, and the soft trickle of water. Evenings were long and unhurried. Music, often from a reed flute or harp, drifted between stone walls. Stories were read aloud from clay tablets, tales of gods, of kings, of ancestors whose names were etched into memory like carvings in wet clay. Education was a mark of noble status. Boys were taught to read and write cuneiform, to perform calculations, and to understand law. Many were trained as scribes, an elite class unto itself. Girls, though less formally schooled, were raised with equal care, instructed in rituals, etiquette, and household management. In the wealthiest families, daughters were educated alongside their brothers, their futures linked to both marriage and influence. But nobility was not without pressure. Every gesture, every word was watched. Reputation was fragile. A scandal could ripple through salons and temples like dust on wind. Families maintained elaborate genealogies, not merely to honor the past, but to justify their place in the present. Alliances were negotiated carefully. Marriages were often arranged with strategic foresight. Beneath the elegance lay the quiet tension of preservation. Beyond their homes, the nobility formed a world of their own, a network of dinners, temple rituals, and court functions. At banquets, they reclined on cushions while servants brought trays of figs, barley cakes, cheese wrapped in palm leaves, and rare wines from distant vineyards. Conversation flowed carefully: politics, temple affairs, rumors of the king's court, and always music, the harpist plucking soft tones while dancers moved slowly between pools of light cast by oil lamps. When public ceremonies took place, the nobility appeared in reserved areas, their positions marked by rank and affiliation. They walked in solemn processions, holding incense burners or offering bowls. They were visible, but untouchable. Their presence alone was a signal of stability and divine favor. To lose that position, to fall from grace, was a quiet kind of exile. Behind closed doors, noble families maintained libraries of clay tablets, each carefully labeled and stored. These were not merely stories, but contracts, legal precedents, inventories, and religious texts. The knowledge preserved in these homes formed the intellectual spine of Babylon. Scribes copied and recopied these records, their styluses tapping gently against wet clay, producing knowledge that would outlive its creators. And still, with all this structure, there were moments of softness. A mother brushing oil into her daughter's hair, a young man tracing the star patterns above the courtyard with his finger, a grandfather reciting the tale of Gilgamesh not as legend but as inherited memory. These quiet gestures were the heartbeat of noble life, small, personal, and lasting. In times of festival, noble households opened their gates to selected guests. Bright fabrics were hung from beams, perfumes filled the air. Offerings were prepared not only for the gods, but for the community. Roasted lamb, sweetened bread, bowls of pomegranate and almond. Even the servants were permitted to share in the joy. Laughter, rare and cautious in daily life, moved freely across polished courtyards. The connection between nobles and temples was particularly deep. Many nobles were descendants of priests, and temple land was often managed by noble families. Some women entered religious service, becoming entu, high priestesses devoted to particular deities. In this role, they wielded influence that stretched far beyond the home. Their voices could sway priesthood decisions, their offerings recorded in temple annals. Children were raised with reverence for duty. Obedience was not merely expected, it was ritualized. Boys learned the laws of Hammurabi as both legal doctrine and moral compass. Girls were taught the responsibilities of hosting, of offering, of listening. Even in play, imitation of adult life was common. Toy tablets, miniature jars, and carved animals gave structure to games that reflected the world around them. The noble caste was not immune to loss. Illness could come quietly, often in the form of fever or infection. Drought could strike fields they depended on. A shift in royal favor could bring ruin. But even in grief there was form. Mourning was a practice, with garments changed, hair unbound, ashes worn on the skin. The dead were remembered with care, their names whispered in home rituals, their tablets kept safe. As you lie in stillness now, imagine your hand resting against the cool stone of a noble home. Hear the faint footsteps of sandaled shoes. Smell the sharp sweetness of wine and smoke. Life here was both elegant and encased, like a flower pressed gently between pages of clay. Nothing hurried, everything observed. Let that stillness guide you deeper into sleep, where even the flicker of a flame becomes a memory. Let the walls of the house close softly around you, not as a prison, but as protection from noise, from time, from forgetting. Let yourself rest in that slow breath of noble Babylonian life. Somewhere in the corner of the courtyard, a low wind passes through the reeds, and above, high above the walls, the stars begin to appear. The walls of the noble house grow quiet. The last cup is set down. The breeze stills. And above the garden, above the shadowed rooftops and slow-burning lamps, the night sky stretches wide, a canopy of thought, belief, and celestial memory. In Babylon, the stars were not silent. They whispered, warned, marked the path of kings and the fate of cities. Tonight, we look upward, as the Babylonians once did, not merely for beauty, but for truth. For thousands of years, long before telescopes, the people of Babylon studied the heavens with methodical devotion. To them, the sky was a library of signs. The moon, the planets, the wandering stars, all carried messages from the divine. Priests trained in celestial observation, known as bare or scribes of the sky, kept night vigils atop temple towers or ziggurats, their wax-coated tablets ready to record the shifting dance of constellations. The ziggurat of Etemenanki, the towering structure many believe inspired the tale of the Tower of Babel, was not merely an architectural wonder, it was an observatory. Its tiered platforms rose toward the heavens not for glory, but for clarity. From such heights, astrologer-priests tracked Venus, the path of Jupiter, the eclipses of the moon. They recorded their findings not as speculation, but as law, patterns revealed by the gods. Babylonian astronomy was meticulous. They noted conjunctions, retrogrades, lunar months, and solar solstices with precision still admired today. They divided the sky into 3 paths: the northern path of Enlil, the middle of Anu, and the southern of Ea, a celestial geography that mirrored their divine pantheon. Their star charts included familiar constellations: the lion, the bull, the twins, ancestors of those we still recognize today. But Babylonian stargazing was never just science. It was theology. Each planetary movement held meaning. A red moon could signal famine. A bright Venus might foretell victory in war. When Jupiter aligned with the moon, scribes gathered in dim-lit chambers to interpret the omen. These readings weren't superstition. They were policy. Kings delayed campaigns. Merchants postponed voyages. Parents reconsidered marriage contracts, all based on what the heavens revealed. In the great temple complexes, priests compiled centuries of celestial records. These formed the foundation of the Enuma, Anu, and Lil, an extensive library of omens drawn from the heavens. Its hundreds of clay tablets detailed what each eclipse, each meteor, each planetary motion might mean. These texts were consulted before every major royal decision. In Babylon, you did not act without the sky's permission. Even ordinary people understood the stars in their own way. Farmers watched the sky for signs of seasonal change. Sailors learned to guide themselves by the rhythms of moonrise. And lovers, in hushed tones, shared whispered wishes beneath constellations they knew by heart. Babylon's calendar, too, was shaped by the heavens. The year was divided by lunar cycles, with festivals timed to celestial transitions. The Akitu festival, a celebration of the new year and the renewal of kingship, began at the vernal equinox, when the sun stood poised between seasons. It was a time of ritual, prophecy, and renewal, watched closely for signs above. To look up at the stars in Babylon was to see more than light. It was to see presence. The gods were not distant, they moved visibly. Ishtar rose in the east before dawn. Nergal, the god of war, gleamed red at twilight. Sin, the moon god, waxed and waned with patient certainty. Even the stars that brought warning were honored, for their message, however dire, was a gift, a chance to prepare. In private homes, people carried small star-shaped amulets or clay tablets inscribed with zodiac signs. Some placed bowls of water beneath open sky to reflect the stars above, a quiet form of communion.
Children were sometimes named after planetary deities, their futures imagined in relation to the constellations under which they were born. And so, the night, to the Babylonians, was never empty. It was a living text. Can you feel it now? The sense that the sky above you is not random, not chaotic, but ordered, deeply, deliberately, with stories older than words. Imagine standing at the top of a ziggurat, the air cool, the horizon stretching endless in every direction. A scribe beside you lifts a stylus, recording the precise moment a star appears. You do not speak. You wait, because one glimmer could shift the course of empires. Even now, many of the tablets they inscribed remain. Buried for centuries, they speak again in the hands of modern scholars. And what they tell us is astonishing. That the Babylonians could predict eclipses, that they mapped planetary periods with a precision that foreshadowed Hellenistic astronomy by centuries, and that they understood with reverent clarity the sky as both science and soul. They believed that the universe operated like a divine machine with cogs and cycles known to the gods. Their nightly work atop the towers was not just to observe, but to participate in that divine machinery, to interpret, to record, and to respond. A delay in the setting of Mars, for example, might not only influence a king's military campaign, but require offerings, appeasements, and ritual lamentations. Heaven and earth were linked, bound by threads invisible, but always tense. And within these rituals, there was beauty. Imagine an astronomer-priest wrapped in embroidered robes, preparing the observatory for the night. He lights a small fire in a bronze bowl, not for warmth, but for symbol. Fire echoing the stars above. He checks the rising line of the moon against etched markers. He breathes slowly, deeply, watching, listening. Then, at the right hour, he writes, one line at a time, one star at a time. A record not for himself, but for the ages. Some of these records contain dreams, not just astronomical calculations, but reflections, questions, lines of poetry even. One fragment reads, "When the heavens bend, the earth must yield." And so we drift now, deeper into this celestial realm, into the mindset of a people who viewed time not as linear, but as circular, as something that returned. Recurrence was sacred. When Venus disappeared, they did not fear it. They knew it would return. Just as seasons would turn, just as omens would realign. This brought comfort, order, peace, even amid chaos below. Let yourself sink into that rhythm now. Let your breath follow the moon's slow rise, the stars' patient arcs. Let your thoughts soften into that ancient sky, a one where fear and hope shared the same horizon. And in that soft dark above Babylon, remember this: the stars did not belong to the priests or the kings. They belonged to all. A shepherd in the hills could look up and see the same patterns. A child on the riverbank could point and wonder. The heavens were the great equalizer, seen by all, interpreted differently, but shared always. The wind moves gently again. The torches are dimmed. Clay tablets are tucked away. And high above, the stars turn as they always have. Slow,
serene, eternal. Remain in their quiet company. Let their stillness guide your dreams. There is no need to rush forward just yet. There is peace in the sky. Stay with it for just a while longer.
Even beneath the stillness of the stars, the city itself was never truly silent. As dawn approached, a gentle murmur would rise, first the faint rustle of robes, the creak of carts, the distant call of traders. Babylon, for all its celestial wisdom and inner sanctuaries, was also a gateway, a place where roads converged, languages mingled, and the known world brushed against the unknown. To understand ancient Babylon fully, we must leave its inner courtyards and quiet towers, and instead walk outward toward its bustling gates, its river docks, and its ever-shifting borders. The great Ishtar Gate, with its gleaming blue tiles and sacred animal motifs, marked more than the ceremonial entrance to the city. It symbolized passage. Through it passed embassies, merchants, pilgrims, and the curious. Each traveler brought more than goods. They carried customs, dialects, myths. Babylon did not merely absorb these fragments, it responded to them, shaped them, refracted them into something new. At the city's edges, languages layered upon one another. Akkadian remained the tongue of scribes and records, but Aramaic was rising, spoken by traders, messengers, and travelers from the west. A Greek merchant might bargain using borrowed Babylonian terms. A priest from Elam might chant in his native tongue while nodding to Babylonian rites. It was a world of translation, not just of words, but of thought. The markets near the river were perhaps the liveliest places in Babylon. Here, Sumerian seals might lie beside Egyptian beads, Indus Valley textiles beside Anatolian copper. The scent of frankincense mingled with grilled fish and barley cakes. A woman might carry a jug of date wine balanced gracefully on her shoulder while passing a caravan from distant Bactria. The air was thick with salt, spice, and the endless rhythm of exchange. Even beliefs traveled. Foreign deities found shrines in shadowed corners. Some were quietly adopted into Babylonian cosmology, their traits merged with local gods. Others remained distinct, visited only by those who remembered. Religious festivals became points of encounter where rituals might overlap. Candles might be lit for unfamiliar names, and prayers might cross boundaries. The Euphrates itself was a channel not just of water, but of life. Boats carried more than grain or timber. They bore news, letters, ideas. A single vessel might carry scribes, soldiers, spices, and sacred statues. And on the banks, people waited to meet, to trade, to listen. Life on the edge of empire was complex. Beyond the city walls stretched vast lands of farmers, nomads, and small villages, some loyal to Babylon, others wary, others indifferent. Tax collectors rode dusty roads with clay tablets and temple guards. Messengers bearing royal seals galloped through mountain passes. And here, too, culture filtered and settled.
An inn at a crossroad might host a Babylonian scribe, a Median hunter, and a Phoenician storyteller in one evening. Over shared bread and firelight, they might trade tales of storms, of omens, of kings. The scribe might record a saying he'd never heard. The hunter might learn a god's name unfamiliar to his mountains. This was how knowledge moved, not always in temples, but in voices. And still, despite all the movement, Babylon remained at the center, a gravitational force. People came not only to trade, but to learn, to observe, to dream. Some returned home with new measurements of the stars, others with stories they'd recite in distant courts. A few stayed, drawn by something they could not name. For the Babylonians, the edge of empire was not a line. It was a meeting place, a mirror, a question. They did not fear the foreign. They engaged it, interpreted it, translated it. This openness did not erase who they were, it deepened it. There were diplomatic residences near the outer districts, modest yet ornate homes for foreign envoys. These were places of cautious hospitality. Treaties were discussed in shaded courtyards over fruit and honeyed wine. Disputes were settled with measured phrases, watched carefully by scribes who recorded every word. The clay tablets created in these moments would travel across empires, sealed and stamped envelopes of earth. And beyond the written word, gestures spoke volumes. A shared meal, a symbolic offering, the placement of a guest within a room. In Babylon, etiquette was layered, ancient, nuanced, filled with meaning. A host might offer salt before water, bread before fruit, not out of habit, but to signal respect, alliance, intent. Some travelers came in search of healing. The temples of Babylon were not only centers of prayer, but of medicine. Physicians, known as asu, practiced alongside exorcists, combining herbs and spells, diagnostics and divinations. A man from a distant province might arrive ill and leave weeks later with not just salves, but a new belief in unseen forces. Even illness crossed borders here. Others came seeking justice. Babylonian law, preserved since the days of Hammurabi, held a reputation far beyond its borders. Merchants who felt wronged in trade, farmers whose land had been taken, women denied inheritance, all might journey to plead before a judge. Courtrooms were open-air spaces, often near temples, where disputes were aired and rulings made with reference to precedent etched in clay. The law was both a sword and a shield, wielded in the shared language of order. And for those not born within Babylon's walls, the city could offer a strange kind of freedom. A foreigner who worked hard, who learned the language, who honored the gods, might find a place here, might marry, settle, raise children who would one day call Babylon home. Identity was not erased. It was woven into the city's living cloth. Even children in this borderland of ideas became translators. They learned 2 or 3 languages before they learned to write. They played games brought from foreign lands, ate dishes with strange spices, sang lullabies inherited from travelers. Their world was fluid, generous, awake. And so Babylon endured, not just through its ziggurats or its laws, but through its openness, through its willingness to listen, to absorb, to change. It welcomed others not in spite of its greatness, but because of it. That was its strength. Let yourself rest now in that idea that even at the edge of empire, of culture, of certainty, there can be peace, a place to pause, a place to listen. You are standing just outside the Ishtar gate. The sky is pale now, streaked with the faintest traces of dawn. A bird calls out. A trader adjusts the rope on his donkey. A priestess walks by, her incense trailing behind her like a dream. This is not an ending. It is an opening. And in the quiet hum of the awakening city, you find your place, not as a visitor, but as part of something vast, shared, and still unfolding.
And so, as the soft morning light touches the tallest bricks of Babylon's towers, our quiet journey draws to a close. We have wandered beneath arches weathered by time, followed the curve of clay streets, and listened to the hush of temples where voices once rose to the heavens. We did not walk in the footsteps of conquerors, but beside bakers and scribes, midwives and market sifters, those whose names were never etched in stone, but whose lives built the city, day by sacred day. In the past few hours, you have felt the warmth of sun-baked courtyards, heard the splash of river water drawn in woven buckets, and watched the stars slowly shift above the ziggurat's crown. And somewhere along the way, you may have closed your eyes, and that's all right, because sometimes history enters through dreaming. What lingers now is not noise, but a quiet fullness, a silence that doesn't erase, but gently preserves. So let your breath soften. Let your thoughts drift with the tigress, slow and certain. There is nothing left to do, no decree to issue, no incense to burn, only this stillness, this warmth, this quiet knowing you are safe here, you are held in memory, and in story, and in rest. If this journey meant something to you, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if this soft, hidden history feels like a place you'd return to. And if you're still with me, tell me where and when you listened. I read every comment. I truly do. So now, let the city fade behind you, its lamps flickering low, its gates standing open in your dreams. Sleep well beneath the stars of ancient skies, and thank you for walking slowly through Babylon with me. Until we meet again.